Drifter Bloodied, elderly farmer inside Prairie, drinking house. Then his daughter arrived with Henry. The Prairie drinking house was alive with noise, thick with the smell of ale, smoke and careless laughter. Boots scraped the wooden floor, mugs slammed against tables, and voices rose without concern for anyone sitting alone. In the far corner, almost hidden by shadows, an elderly man rested on a broken chair. His clothes were dusty and torn, his coat once sturdy but now worn thin by years of hard weather. A dried line of blood marked his forehead, and his hands trembled slightly as they rested on his knees. He looked like a drifter to most people, a man the road had chewed up and spat out. Yet there was something about the way he sat that spoke of quiet, strength rather than defeat. People noticed him, of course. Some stared openly, others whispered. A few laughed as they passed by. One man joked that the old farmer had mistaken the drinking house for a charity hall. Another nudged his friend and pointed, amused by the sight of someone so clearly out of place. The elderly man did not react. His eyes stayed fixed on the wooden table in front of him, scarred by years of spilled drinks and careless hands. Those eyes had once watched crops rise from dry soil, had measured seasons by the wind and the sun, not by mockery and noise. The bartender finally approached him, wiping a glass with an already dirty cloth. He looked at the old man with irritation rather than concern and asked what he wanted. Slowly, the farmer reached into his pocket and pulled out a single worn coin. He placed it gently on the counter as if it mattered. "Just water," he said quietly. His voice was steady, though tired, and carried no hint of shame. The laughter that followed was sharp and careless. Water was free, they said, and even that was too much for a man like him. The bartender hesitated, then slid a cup toward him, not out of kindness, but to end the moment. The farmer nodded in thanks and returned to his corner. He drank slowly, each sip deliberate, as though reminding himself he was still alive. What no one saw was the weight he carried. This was not a man broken by weakness, but by years of sacrifice. His back still held the memory of long days in open fields. His hands, the knowledge of honest labor. The marks on his face were not signs of disgrace, but of endurance. As the noise of the room washed over him, he closed his eyes briefly, listening not to the laughter, but to the distant echo of wind across the prairie, where his life had once made sense. To the room, he was just a bloodied old farmer sitting alone. To the land he came from, he was something far more than that. The old farmer's thoughts drifted, far from the drinking house as the night deepened. The noise around him faded into a dull hum, replaced by memories he had buried under years of silence. There was a time when his hands had known only the feel of rich soil and wooden plow handles, when the prairie stretched endlessly before him, promising life if treated with patience and respect. That land had been his pride, not because it made him wealthy, but because it fed his family and taught his daughter the value of honest work. Every sunrise had been a reason to stand tall. Every harvest, a quiet victory earned through sweat and faith. But seasons changed, and not all storms came from the sky. Drought crept in slowly, cracking the earth and draining hope with every passing month. Crops failed, debts grew, and men in fine coats arrived with papers and cold smiles. They spoke of contracts, taxes, and ownership, words that meant little to a man who trusted handshakes more than ink. He fought as long as he could, selling tools, livestock, and pieces of his land, all to protect the one thing that mattered most, his daughter's future. When the choice became impossible, he sent her away. He told her it was for education, for opportunity, but deep down he knew it was survival. Watching her leave had hurt more than any beating he would later endure. He stayed behind, alone on shrinking land, until even that was taken from him. When powerful men needed someone to blame for missing grain and forged records, they pointed at the quiet farmer who had no one left to defend him. The accusations came fast, followed by fists that asked no questions. He learned then how easily truth could be buried when money spoke louder. He did not fight back. Fighting would have changed nothing, and he had already lost enough. Each blow he took felt like payment for a debt he never owed, but he accepted it in silence, believing that endurance was the last thing no one could steal from him. Now, sitting bloodied in the Prairie drinking house, those memories pressed heavily on his chest. The pain on his face was fresh, but the deeper wounds were old, carved by injustice and loss. He had wandered from place to place since losing his land, working when he could, sleeping where he was allowed, carrying his past like an unseen burden. People saw a drifter. They did not see a father who had given up everything for his child. As voices nearby grew louder, accusing him of stealing, the farmer lifted his head slowly. Their words barely touched him. He had heard worse from men who claimed power and righteousness. He remained seated, calm and unmoving, as if rooted to the floor, like a tree that refused to fall no matter how hard the wind struck. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet hope stirred, one he had almost forgotten. Someone would remember who he truly was. Not hope for justice, but hope that one day... The door of the Prairie drinking house creaked open, cutting through the noise like a blade. Cold air rushed inside, and with it came an unexpected silence. Conversations slowed, laughter faded, and even the men who had been shouting moments earlier turned to look. She was dressed simply, but carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that did not need to announce itself. Her gaze moved past the tables, past the mocking faces, until it stopped on the elderly man sitting bloodied in the corner. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her expression softened and she took a step forward. "Father," she said, her voice clear but gentle. The old farmer looked up, disbelief spreading across his face. His trembling hands tightened against the edge of the table as if he feared this vision might disappear if he blinked. Years of separation collapsed into that single word. He tried to stand, but his legs faltered, and she was already there, steadying him without hesitation. She touched his face carefully, wiping away the dried blood with the edge of her sleeve. There was no shame in her eyes, no fear of the stares around them, only concern and something stronger beneath it, pride. The room shifted uneasily. The man they had mocked was no longer alone, and suddenly he looked less like a drifter and more like someone who mattered. Behind her entered another figure, tall and composed, dressed in a clean coat that marked him as someone of status. His name was Henry, and the way he carried himself drew attention without effort. He did not raise his voice, yet when he spoke, the room listened. He explained calmly that he had come with the young woman for a reason. Over the years, he said, he had learned the truth about the farmer's lost land, the false accusations, and the men who had benefited from his ruin. As Henry spoke, he produced documents, records that told a story very different from the rumors whispered in dark corners. Names were mentioned, and some faces in the room grew pale. The laughter that had once filled the air vanished completely. The farmer watched in silence, struggling to understand how the life he thought forgotten had suddenly returned to confront those who had buried it. The daughter stood beside her father the entire time, her hand firm around his arm. She spoke then not in anger but with clarity. She told them how her father had sacrificed everything so she could survive, how he had endured injustice without complaint, believing that protecting his child was worth any personal loss. Her words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were true. The Prairie drinking house felt different now. What had once been a place of mockery became a place of reckoning. The old farmer lowered his eyes, overwhelmed not by the room, but by the presence of his daughter and the knowledge that he had not been forgotten. For the first time in years, he was no longer standing alone against the world. Morning light crept across the prairie, pale and quiet, as if the land itself was listening. By the time the sun rose fully, the truth that had surfaced in the drinking house could no longer be ignored. The men who had once laughed the loudest avoided the old farmer's eyes, their confidence drained by the weight of exposed lies. Henry moved with calm purpose, speaking to officials who arrived soon after, presenting records that left no room for denial. What had been taken through deception was now brought back into the open, and with it came the slow return of justice. The elderly farmer sat outside on a worn bench, wrapped in a clean coat his daughter had placed around his shoulders. The bruises on his face still ached, but they felt distant compared to the heaviness lifting from his chest. He watched the prairie stretch endlessly before him, the same land he had once walked at dawn, measuring time by the color of the sky. For years, he had believed those days were gone forever, buried beneath loss and silence. Yet here he was, breathing freely, with his daughter beside him. She spoke softly, telling him of the life she had built, of the strength she had gained, from the lessons he taught her without ever realizing it. Every sacrifice he made had shaped her. Every hardship had become a reason for her to stand taller. Henry listened quietly, respectful, knowing his role was not to overshadow the bond between them, but to support it. He assured the farmer that his name would be cleared fully, that the land and its dignity would be restored. When officials finally approached with confirmation, the farmer stood slowly, steady this time. There was no triumph in his expression, no hunger for revenge. He accepted the news with a simple nod, as though justice was something that should have happened long ago and was merely finding its way home. The men who once doubted him now watched in silence, learning too late the cost of judging a life by appearances. As they prepared to leave, the farmer paused and looked back at the drinking house. It no longer felt like a place of humiliation, but a turning point, a reminder of how close dignity can be to disappearance, and how easily it can return when truth is given space. He did not speak of forgiveness, yet his calm carried more power than anger ever could. Walking into the open prairie with his daughter at his side, the farmer felt something he had not known in years. Not relief, not victory, but peace. He was no longer a drifter defined by loss, nor a broken man shaped by cruelty. He was a father whose sacrifices had not been wasted, a farmer whose roots still held strong beneath the soil. Under the wide sky, he smiled quietly. He had never truly been lost. He had only been waiting for the moment when his story would finally be seen. And when it was, it led him back to where he belonged,